is our keynote speaker. It's the part I always look forward to. The speaker, Art Hugon, is the founder of Investacor LLC, an investment advisory firm in Southern California. He entered the investment business in 1974 with Merrill Lynch. Hugon traded listed stock options as a floor trader on the Pacific Stock Exchange in San Francisco. He has been an active investor for over 41 years. He founded and presided over his own industrial distribution company for 21 profitable years and its president. He is also the author of 2 books, and one thing he left out here is he is also an area winner and division competitor for District 52. So please help me welcome Art Hugon, only a competent communicator. We need to get him back here so he can get further.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. It's good to see all of you again. I was here a few years ago, and I remember many of your faces and meeting many of you. I'm wondering if we can dim the lights just slightly so we can see this.
Yeah, I can take it.
That might be okay as it is. What do you think? I think it looks okay, Wayne.
That looks good.
Looks good.
Actually, though, then you can't see him.
Bring it up a little so they can see me. After all, I took a shower today. I want you guys to, recognize me. Thank you. Even the waitress gave me a compliment. She wants a tip. That's what she said. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at the tender age of 23, I entered the investment business with Merrill Lynch in Chicago. And after that, I worked with Payne Weber, which is now UBS. But I was really frustrated because I soon found out that most of our clients really didn't do all that well with their investments, despite all the high-priced full-time stock analysts that Merrill Lynch and Payne Weber employed. And not only that, I soon found out that most of my peers were much more interested in their own financial success than their clients' financial success. Yep. And it reminds me of a very famous, well-known quote by William Bernstein, who is a well-known investment advisor and author, and often quoted in the Wall Street Journal. On the screen you can see this quote: "Whether you know it or not, Wall Street wants to steal your future." And we're going to talk about some of those things today, as well as some of the fees and fibs of Wall Street. Well, after I worked for Merrill Lynch and Payne Weber, I got the bright idea to buy a seat on the Pacific Stock Exchange up in San Francisco to trade stock options. And I thought being on the floor of the exchange, it would give me the inside edge, and I would make tons of money. So I took all the money I had, and I went from Chicago to San Francisco, and I started out with a trading account with about $30,000 in it. And a year and a half later, I had less than $3,000 left. I like to think I turned the Pacific Stock Exchange into a nonprofit organization. Yeah, that was pretty tough for a young buck to take. To give you an idea, there's a quote from Burton Malkiel and Charles Ellis's book, The Elements of Investing, which goes like this: "Experience may be the best teacher, but the tuition is very high." Yeah. Well, the tuition I paid, that $27,000 I lost back in the 70s, would be equal to about $85,000 in today's dollars. A lot of money for a young buck to lose. Well, licking my wounds, I got a sales job in the industrial safety equipment business, and I progressed in that industry and eventually founded my own business in that industry in 1992 and ran it profitably for about 21 years before I sold it. But all during that time, I was studying investments, and I was a regular investor, and I ran a lot of mock investment portfolios to see how good I was at investing. Now, when I decided to become an investment advisor just a short time ago, a longtime friend of mine said, "Art, you need 3 things to be a successful investment advisor." He said, "First of all, you need a little gray at the temples for that distinguished look." Secondly, he said, "You need a little bit of a paunch for that look of prosperity." He said, "The third thing you need is real tight underwear for that look of concern." Now, I can assure you I have at least 2 out of those 3. If my voice should reach some very high notes tonight, you'll know it's the third thing. I have made many, many mistakes in investing over the years. I studied investment newsletter recommendations. I studied brokerage house recommendations. I looked and studied balance sheets and profit and loss statements. And I studied chart reading extensively. There you go. And most of these, and pretty much everything else you can think of, but most of these produce bad or at best mediocre results. Well, I've come to many conclusions over the last 40-some years, and I'm going to share a couple of them with you tonight. The first one I'd like to share with you is that when it comes to investing, high fees and expenses are killers. Now, this is ironic because the stock and bond markets can give us excellent long-term returns, but high fees and expenses can really hurt those returns. For instance, John Bogle, who founded Vanguard Group and who was named in 1999 by Fortune magazine as one of the 4 investment giants of the 20th century, says that when he was looking at the average of the stock market returns from 1907 to 2007, it returned about 9.5% average per year. Warren Buffett has written in one of his recent Berkshire Hathaway annual reports that from the 50-year period 1964 to 2014, the stock market averaged over 11%. However, most investors don't come close to that, getting that kind of return. And fees and expenses are one big reason for it. Now, as an example, a couple quick examples. I have a good friend, Moishe. Moishe is 86 years old, but his mind is still razor sharp, and he still to this day invests regularly in stocks. Well, Moishe and I were having lunch several months ago when he was only 85. And he was a young man then. And he told me that he had purchased 100 shares of Verizon stock at about $49.50 a share. Now, I'm going to show you on the screen here just the basic commission comparison. There's Moishe's stock, Verizon, 100 shares of $49.50 a share. And then I asked Moishe how much in commissions he paid when he purchased this Verizon stock. Well, he stuttered and he stammered, and then he said he didn't know. I knew he knew, he just didn't want to tell me. But I kept bugging him about this week after week over lunch. And finally he admitted he paid about a 2% commission on $4,950. A 2% commission is $99. Now, he used a full-service broker. Well, coincidentally, another friend of mine, John, had also purchased Verizon stock at about the same time at about approximately the same price. And when I asked John how much he paid in commissions, you know what he told me? Zero. Zero. Now, he did it online, and he used, a discount broker, and I know he has a large account. So knowing he had a large account, I called his firm the next Monday morning, and I said, what if I had a really small account, would have done that same transaction? What would it have cost me in commissions? And they told me $7 if I did it online, even with a very small account. Even if I had to rely on one of the people over the phone to guide me through the transaction to do it online, it would only be $7. If I didn't have a computer, they said they'd have to charge me $25. Either way you look at it, either scenario, there's a huge difference there. And my friend Moishe doesn't rely on investment advice from his broker when he purchases stocks. So he's really spending money that he needn't spend. He doesn't really have to spend. Okay, let's look at another example. A recent client of mine came in and she told me she was investing in an international stock fund, mutual fund. How many of you here are familiar with mutual funds? Most of you? Okay, good. And she was paying, each time she purchased shares in the fund, 3 3/4% sales charge. That hurts, right? I can see it on your face. And not only that, this particular fund had an expense ratio of 1.18%. Now, I don't want to confuse it without showing you on the slide here. We're going to look at fees and expenses on a hypothetical $10,000 investment. My client, and we'll call her fund that she was investing in, Fund A, was paying that 3.75% sales charge, which is $375 on a $10,000 investment, and an expense rate of 1.18%, which is $118 per year. Every year she owns it on that $10,000 investment for total fees and expenses of $493. Well, she was very insistent on a fund which had heavy European exposure. So I showed her another fund that she could purchase with a 0% sales charge and only a 0.27% expense rate. So she would only pay $27 in fees and expenses on a $10,000 investment. Now that's a big difference. If you compare Fund B with Fund A, you don't have to be a genius to figure out Fund B saves you $466. That's reason to celebrate. But not only that, the second year, she would only have with her fund about $9,507 to continue earning money for her, whereas with my fund you'd have about $9,973 to keep earning money for you. Now, sometimes people ask me about some of the other funds that I oftentimes own or recommend. I have an international fund which has a 0% sales charge and a 0.14% expense ratio. So the fee on that $10,000 investment would only be $14. By the way, this fund just decreased their fee to 0.13%. So you would actually end up paying now $13 instead of $14. As far as the U.S. stock fund, I have one that is a 0% sales charge with a that's a 0.05, not 0.5, 0.05% sales charge, or just $5 total fees and expenses on a $10,000 investment. I have come to the conclusion that brokers are not our buddies, and neither are mutual funds. Well, let's take a look at how fees and expenses can affect long-term returns. Now, John Bogle, who I mentioned earlier, says that in his studies, he feels that the average investor in individual stocks earns about 2.5% less than the market average per year. And he says the average mutual fund investor actually does worse than that, in great part, not totally, but in great part due to high fees and expenses. Now, what are these fees and expenses? Well, brokerage commissions, portfolio transaction costs, fund operating expenses, advertising fees, all those marketing schemes, legal costs and custodial fees, all these kinds of fees that firms in the brokerage business dream up just to make more money. So let's take a look, and I have found this, by the way, to be pretty true. Let's take a look at a hypothetical $10,000 investment after 10 years. If we have one account earning on the left 5.5% versus another earning 8%, that's that 2.5% difference that John Bogle talks about. Now, after 10 years, in the 5.5% account, your account is now worth about $17,100. The 8% account worth about $21,600. That's a dollar difference of over $4,500, or 26% more if you could have been earning that higher rate all along. Now, the thing about high fees and expenses is that things get worse for you as an investor as time marches on. Let's take a look at the same scenario after 20 years. Here's what the same scenario looks like after 20 years. There's the 5.5% account. There's the 8% account. Your dollar difference now over $17,400, almost 60% more if you could have been earning the 8% instead of the 5.5%. It keeps getting worse with time. Here's what it looks like after 30 years. Now the difference, almost $51,000, over 100% more. You see what William Bernstein meant when he said, whether you know it or not, Wall Street wants to steal your future? They do it little by little. And after year, it all adds up. Let's say you're old, like my friend Moisha, who's 86, and let's say you've been on the market for 50 years. Well, here's what it looks like after 50 years. Even worse. Fees and expenses. These are the kinds of things that Wall Street firms have built their wealth upon. Let's talk about point number 2 that I'd like to talk about tonight, and that is that over the long run, it's very, very difficult to beat the average of the stock market return. Oh, it happens now and again, but hardly ever. So let's take a look and see what we have here. This is a study that was done by Burton Malkiel and Charles Ellis, who wrote The Elements of Investing, and they looked at the percentage of actively managed mutual funds where the managers try to pick out only the best stocks to invest in versus the S&P 500. The S&P 500 is the Standard & Poor's 500, which is an index of the 500 largest corporations in America. And they ran a 20-year study, and they found out in their study, which ended on June 30th, 2012, that in a one-year period ending on that date, only 7% of actively managed mutual funds were able to beat the index. In a 3-year period, 17% beat the index. 5-year period, 19%. In a 10-year period ending in 2012, only 23% beat the index. And in the full 20-year period, only 27%, less than 30%, were able to beat the S&P 500 index. Now, actively managed fund managers are very bright people, and they work very hard. And most of them can equal or match the S&P 500 average, but after fees and expenses, they can't, because the fees and expenses detract from your investment earnings. Okay, let's take a look at another study that was done by John Bogle. He looked at mutual funds, and I want to say here, your broker may tell you, yeah, but because we love you so much and you are such a special client, because we are such kind-hearted people, are going to invest in only the best funds for you. Easy, right? Wrong. It's not that easy. So when Bogle did his study, he looked at mutual funds that were available in 1970. And by the year 2006, of the mutual funds that were available for sale to investors in 1970, by 2006, 66% of them were gone. They were not even available, out of business. Why? Because of poor performance. And even more striking, less than 1% of the funds from 1970 had a record of sustained excellence over this time period. Let's take a look at another scenario. Legg Mason is a large asset manager, handled lots of money. We're going to talk about the Legg Mason Value Trust. Now, a really bright fellow, and these fund managers are very bright people, by the way. And William Miller ran this fund starting back in the 90s. And from 1991 through 2005, this fund outperformed the S&P 500 each and every year for 15 straight years. You'd have to be crazy not to invest in this fund, right? Well, here's what happened in the next 3 years. That fund almost wiped out the previous 15 years worth of great performance. And if you would have purchased this fund, let's say at the end of 1998, and held it for 10 years, you would have done worse. You can't see it on the screen here because our screen cuts it off. But you would have done worse on average by almost 4% per year than the S&P 500 average. That's per year, not in total. Now, back in the early 90s, or maybe even the mid-90s, the Legg Mason Value Trust was probably a hot tip to buy. And Warren Buffett once wrote about buying on hot tips and rumors. He wrote about an old wildcat oil prospector who died, and when he got up to the pearly gates of heaven, he encountered St. Peter. And St. Peter said, hey, we have strict zoning laws up here in heaven, and look over there. And he pointed to an area that was fenced off with big locks and chains on the gates, and it was just crammed full of people. St. Peter said, that's where we keep all our oil prospectors, and as you can see, we don't have a room for even one more, so I guess you're out of luck. So the oil prospector says, well, can I say just 5 words? Sure. So the oil prospector shouts, they found oil in hell. And all of a sudden, all the oil prospectors bust open the locks on the gates and they flood out and they rush down to hell. So St. Peter says, well, go on in. There's plenty of room for you now. The oil prospector says, nah, I think I'm going to follow all those other guys down to hell. After all, there might be some truth to that rumor. Let me tell you about a personal experience I had with trying to select top mutual funds that would perform better than average in the future. This is my picture, by the way, without glasses, and the photographer made me look 15 years younger. But back in 1994, it was a very sad year in my family because my father passed away. And when he passed away, my mother asked me to take over the handling of their account. And so at that time, in 1994, I decided to put some portion, not all, but some portion of her investments into actively managed funds, mutual funds, where they try to pick